Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to use the historical records to cut straight through the Hollywood myths and uncover the dramatic rise and ruin of the Pirate Republic. Now, we all know the legends, right? The swashbuckling adventures, the treasure maps, the talking parrots, but the actual reality of this era is far more fascinating and honestly, a whole lot bloodier than the fiction.
So what actually drove thousands of sailors to raise the black flag in the first place? Well, the answer might surprise you, because the real motivation wasn't some kind of cartoonish villainy. It was sheer economic desperation. You see, to truly understand the pirate, you really have to understand the world that threw him away. Section 1. The Republic of Pirates.
To understand how the golden age of piracy actually kicked off, we have to look at the immediate fallout of the War of the Spanish Succession in 1713. Think about this number for a second. 36,000. That is how many sailors were just abruptly dumped into unemployment by the Royal Navy after 12 long years of war. The British government was essentially bankrupt from the conflict, so they rapidly demobilized their fleet, literally dumping nearly 3/4 of their entire manpower onto the streets in just 24 months. Now, here's the kicker. These newly unemployed men weren't just your average deckhands. They were privateers, meaning they were legally trained commerce raiders whose highly lethal skills were suddenly outlawed the second peacetime hit. So the war had inadvertently trained thousands of men in the exact tactics needed for piracy. Facing extreme poverty and feeling completely abandoned by the British government, these desperate guys were backed into a corner. Merchant captains started slashing their wages by over 50%. And to make matters even worse, Spanish Coast Guard vessels, known as guardas costas, were prowling the Caribbean, violently seizing English trading vessels and actively torturing the sailors. Imagine being in their shoes for a minute. Fed up with the abuse and the lack of pay, these mariners realized they could just use their maritime skills to survive on their own terms. Enter two former privateers, Benjamin Hornigold and a man named Edward Teach. They decide to set up a base in the ruined, totally abandoned settlement of Nassau in the Bahamas. Then, in 1715, something massive happens. A Spanish treasure fleet is wrecked in a hurricane off the coast of Florida. Our ex-privateers immediately sweep in and raid 350,000 silver coins right out of the salvage camps. That enormous influx of silver essentially bankrolled an entire anti-establishment society right in the middle of the Caribbean trade routes. Before long, over 2,000 men flocked to Nassau to build what they proudly called the Republic of Pirates. Section 2. Myths of the Black Flag. As this outlaw republic grew, it birthed a highly unique maritime culture. One that looks wildly different from what pop culture has taught us. We always picture the Hollywood myth, right? A ruthless, tyrannical captain terrorizing his own men. But the historical reality? Pirate crews were actually incredibly democratic. They organized shipboard elections to choose the most able sailors for leadership. In fact, men like Benjamin Hornigold were actually voted out of power by their own crews the minute they disagreed with their captain's policies. They could elect you, and they could just as easily depose you. The crucial point here is that these outlaws actually lived by strict, agreed-upon laws. They called them the Pirate Articles. They banned gambling, they restricted drinking strictly to the top deck to prevent catastrophic hold fires, and they guaranteed equal voting rights and equal division of captured treasure. These rules were absolutely necessary to maintain some kind of order on these incredibly crowded, sweltering, and disease-prone ships. And get this, pirates really didn't want to fight if they could avoid it. Combat meant risking severe injury to themselves or, accidentally sinking a highly valuable prize ship. So instead of surprising their prey, they completely weaponized psychological terror. They would boldly announce their arrival by hoisting the black flag, playing blaringly loud music, dancing, and screaming insults. They basically wanted to intimidate a ship into just giving up before a single cannon shot was ever fired. Section 3. The King's Pardon. Now, this booming, anarchic pirate economy was severely tanking British commercial profits, and clearly it couldn't last forever. By late 1717, the British government finally stepped in. King George I issued a royal decree offering a full pardon to any pirate who surrendered. This was to be heavily enforced by Woodes Rogers, the newly appointed governor of the Bahamas. This royal proclamation essentially acted as a ticking clock that immediately shattered the pirate republic. The community violently split into two completely opposed camps. You had the moderates, like Benjamin Hornigold, who actually welcomed the chance to regain their legitimacy. They took the pardon and, amazingly, became active pirate hunters, employed by the governor. On the flip side were the hardliners, led by Charles Vane. They rejected the pardon completely. When Governor Rogers arrived, Vane literally sent a blazing fireship directly into the British naval fleet and escaped into the night. It's crazy to think about, but the arrival of Rogers forced men who had literally just sailed together to hunt one another down, spelling the beginning of the end for Nassau.
Section 4. The Fall of Blackbeard.
Meanwhile, the most notorious figure of the era, Edward Teach, better known to us as Blackbeard, knew the era of piracy was closing. So he decided to attempt a very different strategy for his own early retirement. In May 1718, he brazenly blockaded the entire port of Charleston, South Carolina. He held prominent citizens for ransom, and his demand? Surprisingly practical. He just wanted a chest of medical supplies to treat an outbreak of syphilis among his crew. After pulling off this incredibly audacious score, Blackbeard intentionally grounded his own flagship, abandoned most of his crew, and actually bribed the governor of North Carolina to let him live comfortably on Ocracoke Island.
But, as you might guess, his peaceful retirement was incredibly short-lived. The governor of neighboring Virginia, Alexander Spotswood, had been keeping a close eye on Blackbeard. Without any actual legal jurisdiction to do so, Spotswood independently launched a military assault, led by Lieutenant Robert Maynard, to hunt the fearsome pirate down right in North Carolina waters. The ensuing Battle of Ocracoke perfectly illustrates just how violently the British Empire was willing to strike back. Maynard was smart. He actually hid his uninjured men down in the ship's hold to survive Blackbeard's devastating cannon fire. So when Blackbeard boarded, totally thinking he'd already won, Maynard's men sprang from the hold. What followed was an absolutely vicious, bloody 6-minute brawl. Blackbeard fought like a demon, absorbing 5 gunshots and 20 severe sword cuts before finally being decapitated. Just like that, the terror of the seas was dead.
Section 5. Calico Jack and Anne Barney. Back down in the Caribbean, a totally different kind of pirate drama was unfolding. Calico Jack Rackham, the guy actually famous for designing the classic Jolly Roger skull and crossed swords flag, had fallen in love with a fiercely rebellious woman named Anne Bonny. Unable to legally stay together on land, they, along with a cross-dressing female sailor named Mary Read, stole a swift sloop in August 1720 to return to the pirate life. Bonny and Read were legendary, known to fight just as fiercely as any man on board this incredibly diverse crew.
But Rackham kind of brought his downfall on himself. By October 1720, they were ambushed by a privateer. Rackham and his male crew had apparently been partying all day and decided to hide below deck, totally drunk, leaving literally only Bonny and Read on deck to fight off the entire boarding party. Rackham's recklessness led to his rapid execution. Bonny and Read, on the other hand, actually managed to delay their own death sentences by revealing to the shocked court that they were pregnant.
Section 6. The Final Scourge. With the Caribbean becoming way too heavily guarded, the last few remaining titans of piracy fled across the Atlantic to the coasts of West Africa, bringing us to the final, incredibly bloody chapter of this era. And no one exemplifies this final stand better than Captain Bartholomew Roberts, or Black Bart. He captured over 400 ships in his career. But as his own surviving words reveal, he was driven by a really dark fatalism. He believed his sins as a pirate had already damned him forever. He ruled the seas with this explosive temper and strict discipline, dressing in fine silks, knowing full well that his days were numbered and a violent end was inevitable.
And once it started, the domino effect of the pirate titan's collapse was swift, devastating, and absolute. Just look at this timeline. In merely 5 short years, all the dominoes fell. Bellamy drowns in a storm. Blackbeard is killed in hand-to-hand combat. Rackham is captured and executed. Vane is hanged in Jamaica after surviving as a castaway. And finally, in 1722, the unstoppable Bartholomew Roberts is killed by Royal Navy grape shot off the coast of Africa. The era was over almost exactly as quickly as it began. Which leaves us with one massive question as we wrap up this explainer. If the golden age of piracy was so incredibly brief and ended in such total, violent ruin for almost everyone involved, why do we still care? Why do the ghosts of Nassau continue to captivate our imaginations centuries later? Well, perhaps it's because we aren't really obsessed with their actual crimes. Maybe we're just fascinated by the profound history of neglected, forgotten people who simply decided against all odds to build their own dangerous freedom out on the high seas. Thank you so much for joining me, and I really hope this gave you a whole new perspective on the true history of pirates.